G'day, this is Chris Chapman from the Running Company. We're here to discuss the launch of the new Structure Tri-X 20, which is going to come out the 1st of October. So a bit of background on myself. I worked for Nike for almost 8 years here in Australia and also a year in the UK as well. And I've had a pretty close personal relationship with the Structure Tri-X because I don't know how many thousands of pairs I've sold, not only here but anywhere around the world as well. So have a close affinity with it, and I thought before we talk about the new update from the 19 to the 20, I'd actually have a bit of a look about the history of the Structure 20 and probably from where I started. So looking at the Structure Tri-X 8 was one of the first structures that I got my hands on. This particular structure had a little rear foot medial post, also had a footbridge, and this came out with what's called a warp pad underneath the first metatarsal head. So that's a windlass activation resupination pad. So pretty ahead of its time. Wasn't too strong through the midfoot, but was nice and strong through the rear foot. So it was a good shoe, really comfortable, and also had a really soft lateral landing crash pad too. Moving up to the Structure 9, you can see that the men's and women's gender specific shoes came out here. So both started with the warp pad in as a sample, but then as soon as the production came out, the warp pad was actually taken out of the shoe. Very soft, very stable. You'll note with the women's up through the midfoot, the actual medial posting extended ever so mildly right up through the arch in the midfoot, and that was done from a proprioceptive standpoint. And the men's is very different as well. So yeah, the Structure Tri-X 9 was a very soft shoe. And ran really well, and again we sold tons of them. One of the bigger differences you'll note between the men's and the women's as well is the radius crash pad at the lateral heel as well. So designed for the Q angle for the women from the hip to the knee. Structure Tri-X 10 came out and again carried forward those men's and women's differences. This was a very stable structure, particularly through the rear and the midfoot. It was a little bit firmer than the previous Structure Tri-X, so that firmness actually gave a fraction more stability to the shoe. Had a ride liner. Now, the ride liner actually gave a really soft fit and feel, that initial soft fit and feel above the dual density posting, and was the first of any of the shoes to do that. Now, ASICs do it. New Balance have done it with the recent 860 with their type of ride liner. This shoe also had the footbridge as well, and it also still had that little bit of women's medial posting up into the arch from a proprioceptive standpoint. Then on to the Structure Tri-X 13. So you'll note that with the Structure Tri-X's, they try to keep the tooling every 2 or so years the same. So they just made minor modifications and tweaks to the upper, and the Structure Tri-X 13 carried on for quite a while. Again, men's and women's gender specific differences were here. Particularly with that radius crash pad at the rear foot as well. Now, there was something that they tried to do here in the forefoot in particular, and you'll note right around the forefoot, it bulbs out a little bit on the medial side. They were looking to try and do a first metatarsal island. I think they tried to do that in the equaline and then drop it down through the structure. It actually made the shoe very stable in the forefoot. So they've done a really good job with this particular shoe in that regard. The metatarsal island actually didn't go ahead in production, but you can see how it just bulged out at the forefoot there. Just gave, for people that were pronating still from mid-starts through to toe off, a little bit more material underneath the forefoot, and that held them really well, which is great. The Structure Tri-X 16 was a very big difference. Now, this was a huge departure away from the standard medial posting, and this came out with, it was the first structure with the dynamic support function. Was soft laterally all the way through, had a bigger amount of softness at the lateral rear foot, and then that extended up through to the forefoot as well. The dynamic support, honestly, it just didn't actually work that well, and this particular Structure Tri-X 16 wasn't very stable from our perspective anyway. So just looking at the rear foot degree of pronation, people that were more stable in the previous structure version went to this one and didn't really find the amount of stability that they needed. It was a faster Structure Tri-X, so it was less clunky as a result, which is great. It was a little bit lighter weight and the cushioning was probably a bit better. But for those consumers that had liked the previous versions and then went into this one because of the stability, were a little bit disappointed. So yeah, it was a very big change, and some people absolutely loved it, some people not so much, and that's one of the good things about what we do at the running company. It's just trying to adapt and adjust to the shoes when they change and try and find what's right for every person. So that stayed for another 2 models, and then we went to the Structure 18. Now, a bit over 3 years ago, I was fortunate enough to be in Portland and catch up with the designers and the developers for the Structure and for the Lunar Glide. And one of the things that we discussed was the amount of stability in the midfoot. And when I saw one of the casts of this new shoe, the prototype that they were working on, was absolutely stoked, because one of the first things you'll see is the prominent medial support post from the rear foot ramping up through the arch into the midfoot. So yeah, that definitely answered the call for more support and more stability in the midfoot. The guys knew it was there and they worked on it, they did a really good job. One of the hard things that we find though in trying to build a really good shoe is trying to get the difference in the density from the lateral side to the medial side. And what they found and what we found with this particular shoe is and here's the shoe itself, the lateral compression zone through here was just very soft, and the medial posting was very, very firm. So almost for some people, too big an imbalance from the lateral to the medial side. And over time, we've actually seen a lot of lateral compression in this shoe for people that weren't putting enough force through one foot or the other. The other thing is you need to think about the consumer that runs and uses these types of shoes. So sometimes the people that run in these shoes aren't necessarily straight line runners all the time. They'll go to the gym, they'll do some medial lateral movements and side to side movements as well. And as a result of that being so firm medially, and then with this compression crease making the shoe very soft laterally, we've found a lot of people have come through our doors in their current Structure Triaxes, the 18s and the 19s, and they've compressed laterally. So yeah, that was probably one of the biggest call outs with this particular version of the Structure. It's still sold really well because the upper is absolutely amazing, that one knit booty construction, and then also the dynamic support with the fly wire cabling coming through here to really lock and hold the foot in place is really, really good and really comfortable as well. So Nike are always nailing their uppers, and this one was definitely no exception. But just needed to try and solve that lateral compression issue. And again, I think the guys have actually done a pretty good job. So we'll have a look at the 20 in just a moment. So here's a little bit of detail around the 20, and this is what Nike says. So the upper has a fly mesh upper with dynamic midfoot lockdown, great fit and feel. The midsole, I'll show you in a moment, is very different to the 18 and the 19, and the outsole as well. Let's just get stuck into it. So the first thing that I find with the upper of this shoe, if you have a look at the structure, is yes, it still has the dynamic fly mesh and still uses some of that dynamic fit as well, but the way it goes about it is very different. So they use this looping system right through the midfoot here, and it starts at the front and then works its way up here until the two last eye stays. Now, I find this looping system will actually be really durable. That should definitely not come apart or fall apart in any way, shape or form, and give a really good lockdown through the midfoot. And then just to reinforce it at the rear foot, the last two loopholes are reinforced again with the fly wire cabling on both the lateral and then the medial side as well. And you see they call that dynamic fit there. But let's get straight to the guts of it. Is really the medial posting and the difference between it and the midsole, because this is really where the heart and soul of this shoe is changed. So having a look at the difference between the 19 and the 20, they've gone back to more of a traditional dynamic support, similar to the 16, but a lot more stable this time around. So I think they've learned from the dynamic support of the 16, learned from the imbalances of the 18 and the 19, and I reckon they've nailed it here in the 20. So here's why. We'll have a bit of a look. The first thing is probably the geometries and the actual width of the amount of ground contact coming in, of your foot coming into ground. So the new 20 is a wider base overall, so a wider base of stability for the runner straight off the bat. So that's a really good starting point. And again, full ground contact all the way through, which is great. The most prominent thing was definitely that medial posting. That has disappeared altogether. So Dynamic support is still in here, and you can see at the rear foot where it starts to get firmer and use another density of midsole. On the lateral side, this is where they've really nailed it. So notice the geometries here, they're not cutting into the shoe anymore. So as a result, it makes it less chance of the shoe to having laterally compress over time. We've had gait analysis on this shoe, we've run in this shoe. The transition from heel strike to mid stance to toe off is a lot smoother as a result, because you don't have the clunkiness of the initial lateral compression being so aggressive and then moving to a big medial post on the inside as well. So it's a very smooth transition now from heel strike, rolling through to mid stance and engaging some of that support all the way through to toe off as well. So done a really, really good job with the transition from rear foot, mid foot, and then forefoot. The good thing is the pitch is a really generous pitch as well, so it's 22-12, so a 10 mil offset. That 10 mil pitch means it's going to be open to a lot of runners. It's not an 8 or a 6, and it's not a 12, 13, 14. 10's a really good sweet spot. So now having the shoe not very soft laterally, not having it dig in medially through here as well, a really nice midfoot lockdown in the upper. This shoe is now being opened up to a slightly wider consumer base, and probably what it has been in the past, which is great. So more people are going to be able to run in that shoe and really enjoy it. And again, talking about that lateral cutout there, the difference is pretty significant. So a really good update all in all for the Structure Tri-X20. We're really excited to get this on the shelf and get this on the feet of runners. Said we've tested it ourselves. We've seen that it holds up really stable in comparison to the competition from a rear foot perspective. And again, they've nailed the fit and feel with the upper. So yeah, here's looking to the Structure Tri-X20 coming out in the 1st of October here in Australia at the Running Company. Have a good day.